I'm excited to have Roberto Milani with me. And Roberto has been a leading presence in the fitness industry for over 3 decades. He's the regional group fitness manager for In Shape Family Fitness. And this is what's really cool. He provides education, training, and development. Are you ready for this? For 300 plus coaches. And he also has an MBA in sports and fitness management, which I also think is very, very cool. I have a very funny story about that I'll share with you sometime. Dennis Dunphy is a seasoned wellness and fitness professional with a proven track record. He is the co-founder of Stick Mobility, which it's very interesting. I think your first show you guys were at was Dallas, right, Dennis? You're muted right now, but
yes, we had the Dallas show. Yes.
Yeah, it was in Dallas at our Dallas Mania conference, and it was crazy how many people just adored this. I was very excited by it. Gail Bannister Munn wouldn't put it down. Michael Hughes used it in almost every session. It was a very cool product. So what Dennis does is he is one of the co-founders, and he's dedicated his career to optimizing human movement and performance. His expertise is in wellness coaching, fitness training, and health education. Very, very cool. And Trisha Murphy-Madden, who's a good friend, she's a well-respected person. She's been in the fitness industry for over 30 years, although I always say she looks like she's not even 30. She was honored with the prestigious Fitness Leader of the Year award by IDEA and is the co-founder of Fit Pro Programming. Formerly, she was on-set director for Amazon Halo, where she directed not hundreds, but thousands of workout videos across all the different modalities. So what we're going to be talking about today is mobility. And I always think about mobility. I always think flexibility. And I'm going to start with you, Roberto, like what is mobility and how does it relate to flexibility?
To flexibility. Yes, thank you. So for me, mobility is really about the ability of moving, whether it is something that you're going to do in the gym, a specific exercise, or even just functional day-to-day, as we call ADL, activities of daily living, where it is somebody that wants to go hiking, or somebody wants to go work in the garden, or just sitting, in your chair and standing up. So things that often we take for granted. And this is something that I always emphasize, especially with the type of clientele that I work with at In Shape, and also in workshop and classes and master classes that I teach, which is predominantly the active aging population. But again, when we talk about mobility, is something that relates to the ability of the joints where 2 bones meet to move, and an active range of motion without any kind of pain and restrictions. Of course, mobility also is directly connected to flexibility, where flexibility is something that relates more to the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, so connective tissue, soft tissue, right? And the two go together. One thing that I always talk about, maybe a mantra or a phrase that I use is motion is lotion, which I'm sure I borrowed from somebody else, but it's something that ticked in me from the first time I heard it. I unfortunately don't remember where I heard it the first time, but it's something that I always talk about. It's basically, if you don't use it, we lose it. So that is really what mobility for me is all about.
Yeah, those phrases are just perfect. They're absolutely perfect. And the funny thing is, I always talk about this. I go to the Mayo Clinic, and I was lucky enough to get Dr. Ed Laskowski, who was head of orthopedics at the Mayo, who's since kind of semi-retired because he's doing work with the Olympic, he actually was doing work with the Olympic athletes. And he uses the motion is lotion theory, which is great. And it does relate to people of all ages. Now, Trisha, you do a lot of programming for the 40 plus. I know that workshop is phenomenal and everybody adores it. And we don't I know we think about mobility as, oh my gosh, it's for the older adult, blah, 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 but I think it's for all ages. Can you
Yeah.
share how you work that into your 40+ programming?
Well, I think it's just a shift in the season of our lives, right? When we're in our 20s and we're in our 30s, or maybe younger even, or even in our early 40s, our goal, at least in fitness, was sometimes aesthetic, right? It was like, how high can I kick? What yoga pose can I attain? I think you and I have even taken yoga together where we're like, can I do full splits on both sides? And then something shifts and you realize that the goal is actually to be able to pick up children. The goal is to be able to take the path unknown. The goal is to be able to say yes to athletic endeavors forever. And then as you get older, you know, in my mom's case, her goal at 80 is to be able to reach down and pick up her youngest grandchild versus being able to do splits, right? So I think as things change, we also coach very differently. So for me, when I coach anybody in the 45 plus category, I start talking about their motivation in a very different way. It's not that they haven't always needed mobility to do my classes. It's just that they've understood it very differently. They've oftentimes we're born with some pretty good mobility, right? We can squat with our butt touching, almost touching the ground, or we can, you know, do a forward fold with no problem. So as mobility shifts and changes, we have to start talking about it and have the conversation, because there's definitely people who go to 10 yoga classes a week but still can't do certain exercises, and that's because the joint doesn't have the range of motion that it used to. So it's more about shifting the conversation.
And I think that that's very important for us to be able to do. I actually just took this morning, a yoga sculpt workshop. And I was by far, probably by 25 years, older than everybody in that class. And they were talking about increasing flexibility. And the teacher, which I was really shocked at, she said, come on, work harder or you're just going to maintain. And I looked at her and I was like, baby, that's my goal. You know what? Maintenance is my goal at this age and this phase of my life. And if I can maintain and I can ski as well this year as I did last year, you know, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be a happy camper. So you're absolutely right, Tricia. It's the conversation. I love the way you phrase it. The conversation needs to shift. Now, Dennis, please talk to us about the mobility. And I'm harping a little bit on the mobility stick, and I apologize for that. But I really do like, tell us how the stick got developed and kind of why.
The stick is a very simple tool. I mean, it's one of the first tools any human ever picked up from the time humans existed. So it's a very relatable tool, very simple. The stick itself is strong. It's flexible because we want the flex, because when we're asking somebody to get into an end range position, they need to be able to express strength. That is where we really know that you own that range of motion. And so that allows that person, when we get them into an end range position, to say, okay, now let's bow the stick a little bit. Let's bring that neuromuscular control and strength to that component, that end range position. The other thing the stick does too is it adds stability that a lot of people, especially as they're aging, Roberto can relate to this with the foot function with Dr. Emily. We know that people's feet really don't work all that well in the general population. So you can't ask somebody who doesn't know how to use their foot to stand on one leg and then wonder why they can't stand on one leg. So if all they're going to do is lift the foot up and put it back down, you're not really teaching them anything. So if we can give them a stick, just a simple tool as an extra point of contact, then that allows them to get that stability so they can maintain the posture and position we're looking for, so we can develop that skill set, so we can strengthen that single leg stabilization and what Dr. Emily calls foot to core integration, right? So that's the reason why we developed the stick. a lot of people think of mobility as just stretching, and for us, it's much more than that. It's knowing and being active in that stretch, not passive. Passive stretching is fantastic, but active stretching and trying to really access new control in your ranges of motion for us is where the money shot really is.
Yeah. And can you explain the difference between mobility, flexibility, and stability?
So for us, flexibility is just simply the ability to bend without breaking, right? It's how far can a tree flex before the trunk shatters, right? So that's flexibility. So for us, a lot of people they always say, I need to be more flexible. That is a component of mobility, right? So your ability to move your arm into a certain range of position to a certain extent without it becoming injured. Mobility is simply the ability to move from point A to point B. And the more mobility you have, as far as we're concerned, the more options that you're going to be able to dig into when you're trying to do daily activities, athletic events. Years ago, they did a research where they looked at a basketball player, and they found that a basketball player will take over 1,000 different positions in the course of a game. Well, that requires a lot of mobility and flexibility to be able to go into those ranges of motion safely and effectively. And then for us, the stability is when you're moving, your body is always trying to gauge, okay, am I stable? Because I don't want to fall. As an avid rock climber, if you're into rock climbing, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because when you're on the wall and you're looking to go into the next hold, if your brain doesn't sense that you're stable and locked in a position, it's not going to allow you to access that range of motion or reach for that next hold, because it understands that you're probably going to fall off the wall and your body is not looking for that to happen.
Right. And that's where it's that mobility, it's that strength. It's like an integration of everything.
Yeah.
Now, Roberto, you talked about, I'm
No,
you.
yeah, I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to add something because I mean, just always, I know Dennis for several years now, and I just really love the way that he expresses, the concept of mobility. That's so powerful, I think, and very empowering. And when he was talking about, the basketball player, for me, the first thing I think about is, moving in 3 planes of motion, because I still see today, unfortunately, people getting stuck in 1 plane of motion, the sagittal plane, front and back. That's how most we move, but we need to be able to do mobility, flexibility as well, but mobility especially in all 3 range of motion, all 3 planes of motion. And that's something that, again, I always try to, when I train instructors or work with clients, it's something that I constantly emphasize over and over again, because that's how we live. We are 3-dimensional beings, and we need to be able to move. And most of the injuries happens in the transverse plane when we start to rotate, and that's where we get often stuck. We talk about the thoracic spine, where just rotation is just not there, and as well as that. So.
No, and the other thing that happens, I always talk about this with, I have a bad lower back. I have 4 very large sons, and I feel like I was pregnant for like a decade. And and you're carrying these child, and I've got a bad back. And if I'm doing the forward flexion and I'm doing the torque, and then you get the herniation of a disc that's pushing out. I have a couple bulging discs. Luckily, nothing's herniated yet. And it's pushing out for me. And what's fantastic is my whole back will go into spasm. Okay. It will contract. It will get strong so that I don't mobilize any further. So it's like this give and a take. And I said, thankfully, my back spasms, because if I went just a bit further, that's when that lovely little, how discs are there. You've got the bone, and then you've got this lovely little donut, and then you've got the bone, and this little cake donut. My jelly wants to spurt out and herniate, but the back totally contracts, and I can't move anymore. to protect from over mobilizing. So it is quite a balance there. I did like, Roberta, when you talked about that, you said mobility feels like it's the bones, like it's the range of motion, and flexibility is the musculature, the tenderness, attachments, as well as the ligaments. Here's something I also think about. I go into a yoga class or I go into a Pilates class, and immediately some of these instructors have me rotating. And exactly, Trisha, I'm going to call on Trisha. It drives me a bit insane because I'm like, you know what? Your 20 something year old body can handle that. I can't do it. So talk to me about heating the body up and then increasing my mobility or my flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's in group fitness, which is sort of my wheelhouse. I think it's really any workout you do, and Roberto's been in a million of my classes. I believe no matter what the format is, every single warm up should include dynamic movement in each plane of motion and some form of lengthening or flexibility stretch in each plane of motion. So if you come into it like, and I don't want to oversell fit pro programming because that's not what this is about. But that's at the base of our education, is that any program we teach, we need to warm the body up in this very systematic way. And there's lots of benefits, by the way. It's not just like you're not going to hurt your back because you did dynamic movement in each plane of motion and you did some stretching, or lengthening is what we call it. You also burn more calories. You know, like when the muscle is ready to allow the mobility of the joint, the squat is bigger. And guess what? When the squat is bigger, the wearable is telling you you're doing more. And even if for the consumer, it's caloric, whatever, you're just setting them up to see the benefits. And consumers have their motivations. Our motivation with our clients and our students is a lot of big important things. Our consumers sometimes come in and just say, God, I want to burn more calories. I want to, you know, their goals are maybe slightly different. So can we have the best of both worlds, where we improve their flexibility and mobility? And by the way, their device is telling them that they had a more effective workout calorically. That's a win on both sides. Neither should be condemned. So that's sort of how I think of it, especially as I start to teach older populations.
Yeah. And Dennis, what are you finding from the what Trish is talking about is that if the body's warmer, it can move further, it can engage more muscle fibers. How does that affect an athlete? How does that prevent our, injury and increase recovery?
Yeah, we're always looking to improve soft tissue quality, muscle fiber quality, joint quality, fluid movement. So our bodies are primarily space and fluid. That's what we are. So if we know that, then we also need to look at the physics of what fluid is and what it does. And that's what we want to teach our clients, is the fact that your body is fluid. It needs to move under the same principles of physics. And if we can improve that fluid flow, then you're overall going to feel much better. It's like figuring out if you have a fish aquarium, right? And the fish are looking unhealthy. It's typically because the fluid that they're swimming in is not filtering properly. So with the human body, we're trying to do the same thing. A lot of what we have or what we experience is the fact that we have really crappy fluid. So for us, it's getting people to move a little bit better, pump that fluid through the body. When Roberto was talking earlier about joints moving, well, it's crucial because as joints move, then it displaces synovial fluid. And that synovial fluid pumping in and out of the connective tissue is what keeps your connective tissue vibrant, healthy. We know that as we age, the quality is going to ultimately decrease, but it's at what rate can we slow that down, right? So for a lot of people, the quality of that connective tissue usually goes like falling off a cliff, where we want to try to just make that a nice gradual downslope. And so for me, working especially with the older population, that's my main goal, is to try to get them to understand what we're trying to do. And especially, and the big part is getting younger people to understand the importance of working on their quality of the movement, because at the age of 20, if you would have told me it was important, I would have just laughed at you and been like, whatever. Okay. But then when I got to mid 30s, I was like, okay, that's a little important to think about, right? And so even getting into this industry, that wasn't taught to me right away, right? So yeah, the first 5-10 years I was doing this, that wasn't really at the forefront of my thought process. But then through personal experience and education, you start to realize, okay, that needs to become a higher priority.
Yeah, because it's pretty interesting. If you don't maintain that mobility and don't maintain that flexibility, you then injure yourself. It's like, oh, I don't want to take the extra time. I'm going to sneak out of class 5 minutes early. I've got to go pick up my kids. I've got to go, something I've got to do. I missed that last 5 minutes. Yeah, keep missing that last 5 minutes, because then you're going to injure yourself and you're going to be out of it for another 6-8 weeks. And how do we train people? The way I always think about it is, I remember, your mother saying, brush your teeth. These are the only teeth you're going to have. Well, now they're not. I mean, I could get anything I want replaced at this point, but still trying to encourage people to understand that your joints and your ligaments and your connective tissue need to be mobilized. Now, Roberto, you're working with a lot of older adults and in shape. And we're talking about this class, and I bugged you. I wanted you to make sure you put that description in there. Everybody who's listening, if you guys have questions, throw it in the chat box, because we would love to hear from you. We'd love to answer your questions. I'm sorry, Roberto, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the class that I teach I've been teaching in shape for about 2 years now. It's called Mobility, Stability, and Balance, which really focuses on three. This is always what I introduce in a class. And I also wanted to say that even though the majority of the attendee, the demographics, is always around, I would say 60 to and over, every now and then I get a younger person, the curious one. And they're like, of course, I'm like, okay, because I do use the chair. So a lot of times when people see a chair, like, oh my God, it's going to be boring. So I would say that 90% of the time, the younger person comes to me after class. Thank you. I haven't done this type of work in a long time. I feel so good right now. So it really, I think it's starting finally to hit. And I was thinking about this when Dennis was talking about when he was younger, and I was the same way as you, Dennis. Somebody said that to me. I used to do this because I was an athlete. I did gymnastics, I did swimming, I did diving. So I did mobility training. I didn't know that was mobility training, though. But soon after, I wanted to go and pump the weights and kick and punch and not really focus on that, thinking about the future. But one thing also that I always want to share with the viewers and listeners, is that mobility it can sound complicated, but it's also simple, because the way that our body is built, we talk about the kinetic chain, where you have a sequence of joints that are there for us. And if you can just focus on one joint, the main joint one at a time, and just do some movement to loosen up the joint, that is your mobility right there. And it's something that can be integrated it should be integrated in every single class, whether it is an aqua fitness class or a yoga class or a kickboxing class or high intensity boot camp, strength training, bar, you name it. It's really about movement and like something that Dennis said a few minutes ago, quality of movement. I always say another phrase, Sarah, quality over quantity. Focus on quality of movement, not so much of quantity, because that will take you along for many, many years to come.
And what I'm also thinking of is I always think of the relationship between mobility, flexibility, and recovery. What's going on, let's say, with foam rolling? How does that fit in? Anybody have any brilliant ideas or new research that's popped to mind? And they're all silent. Okay, come on.
Well, I integrate foam rolling. I mean, myself personally, and with clients too. I don't. It changes that tissue quality. It gives you that nice momentary improvement, which can help you therefore get better results. So, by all means, I let clients understand. You know what, foam rolling is not a bad thing. I know there's a big debate on what it actually does and how effective it is. Uh, we've used it long enough to know it does have benefits. So when people say, "Oh, it's not beneficial," I'm like, okay, well, 25 years of this, I can tell you, it does something for you. So, you know, when a client comes in, for me, when a client comes in, the two things that they do, they grab a foam roller, they get those chronic areas where they know they typically have some restrictions, so we can improve that tissue quality right in that area. And then it's about a 10-minute joint by joint mobilization. And once they do those two things, which really should take about 15 minutes, give or take, now we're ready to get into that training program.
Yeah. And Tricia, do you integrate it with any of your group fitness programs? Or how long do you keep your warm up? How long do you keep your flexibility at the end of the?
Okay, so, I mean, controversial statement is, I think a lot of people that, come into fitness spaces are like, oh my God, I need to do foam rolling, and now I need to do mobility work, and now I need to do strength work. And now there's so much for the average consumer to do. So from a group fitness perspective, it's really hard for me to take time and incorporate foam rolling. It's really easy, and it's low for me. It's an easy pull, like it's an easy lever to pull to do mobility and flexibility work. So for me to say to instructors, get out foam rollers and incorporate that, that's a very big jump for me. But do I think people should do it? And do I do it myself? Yeah, I've got one in the corner, and when I'm watching the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, that's what I do. Does that make sense for when I look at even just my girlfriends who are not fitness professionals, for them to add a layer of like, oh, now we're going to go home and foam roll after working out for an hour, working 8 hours, cooking a meal for 3 kids and playing Uber all day. No, it's not going to happen. So that for me is actually the bigger jump. So I think in group fitness, unless it's a foam rolling class, which I've seen done really well, but not usually attended by the sort of that category of humans that are busy and working and raising children and all the things. So to me, it's a big lift. Do I see value from it? Yeah, absolutely. Do I do it in my group fitness classes? No.
Interesting.
Not a popular answer.
Yeah, no, but it's a real answer. Roberta, what are you seeing in Shape? Do you see that people are continuing to use foam rolling and the group fitness programming?
Yeah, so I agree also. It's a real answer. And I love that because it's real. It's about reality, So, so we do use foam rolling as part of our In Shape. We have a small group training now component of our fitness department that is called Vital, and we offer classes there where the end of the class is basically there's always at least I think it's 4 exercises for stretching, flexibility, and I would say that most of our coaches use the foam roller for at least 2 of them, sometimes for all 4 of them. So that is something integrated in group fitness classes. We actually don't provide, because we'd be providing foam roller for every single participant, so that it's storage and also cost. However, when available, like in one of the classes that I teach a strength class on a Wednesday morning. I have enough foam rollers that I can actually integrate them in the class. So, and for me, it's all about education in the sense that I might not be able to hit all the different areas, but at least I'm gonna squeeze in one specific area where I know that it's usually sore for everybody, or it could be your hip, tightness, in the upper mid back, your calves, for instance, around the ankle joint, as we always have limited dorsiflexion mobility for that area. So that helps. So, yes and no, it depends.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I think a lot of people are using it, especially athletes, I've got one son that's playing pro hockey, and he will not start a game unless he's fully foam rolled, and he's always the last one of the locker room, which drives me crazy, but he's rolling out and he just does it. And Dennis, you're laughing because I think that's probably what's going on with some of the personal training you're doing and the people you're working with.
Well, what's funny is go ahead, Roberto. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Actually, I wanted to just add something about someone that we all know, Dr. Emily Splickle, because one of the things that I've been working with Dr. Splickle for over 10 years now. More than that actually. It's doing foot release using a ball, and that is super important because that is something that is people feel the benefit immediately. There's other benefits, but one part is really allowing the many joints that are in your feet that we use every day. I mean, I lived in New York, so I was on my feet every day, or Chicago. You're always constantly walking on cement. You need to be able to just release that soft tissue, and doing that literally 5 minutes of foot release just brings tremendous benefits that carry on for the rest of the day.
It's interesting. We got a question from Paula. She says she teaches a sculpt class as well as a vinyasa and yin yoga, and they're always discussing flexibility and improving through stillness and breath. And Dennis, I still want to find out from you about the athlete, but I also want to discuss mobility, how it's affected by stress in the body through long holds, and also the breathing.
Breathing is very much an important part of helping someone improve quality of movement and strength training also. I'll tell you, when I first got into this industry, breath work was not talked about. For me, it's been about 15 years ago where I first started understanding the importance of breath work. And so for us, when we use the stick, it's okay, let's do a little pushing, pulling. Let's get that neuromuscular control and activation we're looking for. And now that we're here, now let's focus on the breathing pattern. We want to get that full inhale, full exhale, decrease stress, right? Also in the strength training community, it's also, okay, let's teach people how important breathing is to actually helping you become stronger. And so that's a big part that I really incorporated in with my clientele, because I say, hey, when you're at home and you're trying to move an object, well, it's not just about being strong in that position. It's also about incorporating that breath work as you're moving that box or you're moving that couch, because the breath work, and teaching them how it initiates all the spinal tissues to help them create a stronger posterior chain and abdominal cylinder as they're moving in and out and dealing with loads. And so for people that haven't really been taught that, once they feel it, they're like, oh, they had that epiphany. There's that aha moment. I think the hard thing for breath work is trying to get people to understand its importance, because I've had clients that come in and they kind of look at me when they first get to know who I am. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do some breath work. And they're like, excuse me? What are you talking about? And so then it's so for me, it's about sneaking it in as opposed to being very upfront with it. Okay, so that way it's okay, let's get you doing certain things. So people say, well, when do you incorporate breath work? And I say, first of all, I just want to make sure they're breathing. Let's start there. And then once we know that they breathe on a regular pattern, then we can refine the technique of the breath work in and of itself. But the first thing I want to see is that they actually are breathing.
And Tricia, how are you incorporating breath work or the stress release during your programs?
I mean, I think it depends on the program, right? So in group fitness, if we're teaching something that's, say, rhythmic and to the beat, you really have a hard time using exhale, inhale, or else you're exhaling and inhaling with the wrong cadence. In certain programs, it's a simple thing. Like I coach instructors to look for what's happening in somebody's mouth. If you're teaching indoor cycling and you ask for max effort and you look around the room and their mouths are closed, nobody can give max effort if their mouth is closed, right? So instead of over coaching, inhale, exhale, a little easier with yoga and Pilates, depending on the format. I usually try to encourage people to breathe naturally, but also check in with, can they talk? What's happening with their mouth? I mean, there's a lot of those kinds of cues you can give. People struggle. I think general consumers struggle when you're teaching 25 people and they're like, exhale, like it's hard for them to understand how it all works together. So if you can get them to think about breathing naturally, and then eventually, if your cueing hierarchy is structured in a way that they're really hearing what you're saying, you can say something like, I want you to exhale when it's the hardest, and then leave it there. Because with 24 people in the room, did they all exhale when it's hardest? Did they all exhale when it's, at the right moment? Maybe. I hope I got them there. I hope I'm communicating as best I can. But if I see their mouths open or I see them breathing naturally and I encourage them to do that, well, then at least they're breathing naturally. So for me, it's kind of simplifying in group fitness, not over cueing it, and focusing on the moment that you cue it so that they're not overwhelmed with the information you've already shared with them. So your cueing hierarchy has to be very good in order to get the maximum benefits of breath work in a group fitness class.
The other thing is, I kind of like what Dennis said also about sneaking it in. Do you integrate mobility or flexibility training in the middle of the class, or when you finish a certain exercise? If we finish this exercise, it was quads, and now we're going to do a quad stretch. How do you do the magic of that and make it happen?
Well, it's
class, Tricia.
It's all about the transition, right? So if I'm doing a long lever lunge, so say I'm doing a hinged lunge or an extended low lunge, a yogi might call it. If I'm doing a hinged extended low lunge, between sides, instead of just standing up and shaking it out, what if I do a runner stretch, or I do a downward dog to runner stretch, or I do a pigeon pose? And that is the transition to the other side. What's weird about that is it actually feels like effort and work to the participant, as opposed to she's taking a break and making a stretch versus, okay, we're done with this exercise, now stretch. If it's a transition and it feels fluid and connected, then they feel like it's kind of exciting and part of the process.
And Roberto, how do you integrate it, especially when you're dealing with the older adults and they have a little bit more time? I find that my older adults, they'll stay through the whole flexibility. They're not racing out. There's a commitment on it, on the pickleball court, but besides that, Mahjong can wait for 5 extra minutes. So how do you integrate?
Well, so I have actually, in the mobility, stability, and balance class that I created, it's part of the structure. It actually is part of that, so they know it. But I think the way that I frame, it's how, basically what Tricia said, how do you frame this? How do you put it in, how do you package it so that it becomes more accepted, more integrated by the students, by the people attending the class. And I always put it about its mobility. We do some stretching, some traditional stretching at the end of the class, but the meat and potato of the class is the mobility, stability, and balance. And for the mobility part, I always focus on very functional, basic exercises where I actually teach them the proper way. Or like, for instance, when we're talking about a squat, where I see a lot of people just technique-wise doing the squat incorrectly, and it kind of feels like, this is actually what I hear from a lot of them, that they've never had instructors really explain to them and take them through how to do it correctly, and giving them the why behind the what. Our consumers today are much more informed than we were many years ago, and this is also thanks to the internet. So for them to understand, this is why we're doing it. And let me give you an example. Now let's do it together, and then they can feel it. That really resonates with them, and it captures them, and it keeps them coming back for more. They always want more. They always want more. And this is one of the reasons why I love working with this population.
I think you're right. I think they like the physical of it. They want more physically, but I think intellectually, I think that's a smart thing. I am going to share with you guys real quickly. We're going to take a peek. We have Midwest Mania that's coming up October 4th through 6th. And we've got 200 sessions that are going to be at the conference. 70 world-renowned presenters. You're going to see the mobility stick there. You're going to see Tricia Murphy-Madden there. It's very exciting. CECs from all the major organizations. We have 22 amazing sponsors. We have 3 days of education, which leaves you with a fantastic experience here. So I want you guys to take a peek at this. The website is scwfit.com/Midwest. I hope that you guys can all join us. I'm going to ask Dennis, Tricia, and Roberto to just give us a quick summary of what mastering mobility means to them, I guess. That's kind of weird, but let's give it a go. All right, Dennis, you're laughing, so you're my first victim. Just a closing.
For me, master mobility, number
Your
one.
favorite mobility exercise. What trend do you think is really going to take off in 2025 for mobility? Let's do that. All right, I think we're frozen a little bit. Okay, Tricia, you're the queen of programs.
I mean, trends, I think it's just more acceptable now to talk about mobility. And I think, as we look at what it's like to be, I'm in my late 40s. What's it like to be in your late 50s now versus 20, 30 years ago? I think the trend is that just like the word menopause, for a long time we couldn't say menopause, and now I feel like all I hear is menopause. I think mobility training is now slightly sexier than it was, and that's partly because, like, you want to be able to ski and coincidentally beat me. I also want to be able to get better at surfing, right, and get better at skiing. And so for me, mobility is what provides that conduit for my life to be active and fun. And I guess I just think now we're looking at aging very differently, even though chronologically we're somewhere, right? We are looking at mobility as our on-ramp to keeping a very active and sort of fun life, which is really valuable, right?
That's great. Okay, Roberto, short and sweet, baby.
Sure. So for me, it's actually looking at mobility with different lenses. Same thing, but for somebody it can be a recovery, right? But also can be something that promotes strength. For like older adults, again, we don't need, it's about maintenance, being able to maintain what you have and live a happy, pain-free life, or have it more as a recovery tool that you can still, have your workout on days where you're not, lifting 400 pounds, you're not doing a bench press like that. And it's all about consistency and also being just purpose and mindful movement, just being
Perfect.
present in the moment.
That's great. And Dennis, we welcome you back. All right.
My thing is, my goal for everybody is just think of longevity and relevance as far as what you're doing at the age of 30, 40 years of age. Yes, we know there's going to be a decrease in your overall performance, but let's try to make sure that you're able to do pretty much what you're doing now at the age of 60 and 70. So when we see senior Olympic events and we see an 80-year-old person doing sprints, that should not be extraordinary. That should be something that a lot of us can still do. Longevity, make that the focal point of your overall training purpose.
Awesome. All right, guys. I really want to thank you all for joining me today, Tricia, Roberto, and Dennis. And Dan, thank you for running this. We had a little bit of computer glitches and everything came out great. So thank you all. And I look forward to seeing you at the beginning of next month at Midwest Mania. All right, guys. Take care. Have
Bye,
a good
everybody. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.